Ink-a-dink, 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 ink-a-dink. Wow!
Welcome to Basil BuddhaCat Presents. My name is David Stevenson. I'll be Basil's co-host in the show. We have with us, of course, Basil BuddhaCat. And we've got a second show. We're very fortunate to have a second visit, a second visit from Michele Bachmann, who was with us in a show that we just finished taping, and we'll put out from our friends on Comcast, Cable Channel 23 in Danbury, Connecticut, which is right next door to Basil's hometown of Bethel. Now, a little background about Basil, because I translate for Basil because Basil does not speak English. Basil speaks not Cantonese, but Catanese, and let me explain for Basil the reason for that. Basil has become friends with a man by the name of John Kusumi, who has been many times guest on my show, Progressive Soup, and Basil got to know John through Facebook, and when Basil friended John, Basil began getting friend requests from a lot of folks that John knew through John's Chinese democracy movement, which he's the head of in America. And a lot of those folks that John knew and had as friends on Facebook had Chinese characters for names. So we can't translate their names. We had their picture, of course, along with the Chinese character, but Basil became very fluent in not Cantonese, but Basil's got his own special version called Catanese, and that's the language he speaks. For the audience, I'm going to translate whenever Basil adds something into the conversation, and I'm also going to perhaps have to help out Michele Bachmann because we've got a very sketchy connection with her. She's back home in Minnesota. She's chosen to leave the campaign for president on the Republican Party side. Her showing in Iowa was not spectacular. She ended up with 5% of the vote. But I think it bears noting again, like we did in the first show, that that's actually reflective of, on the first go-round, she had considerably more than the 5% people who stood for her in the different caucuses. In Iowa, you go to your caucus and you line up with your first choice for candidate. Now, if your candidate in that caucus does not get 15% is the threshold for each caucus. If you do not have 15% representation within the caucus room, then your caucus goers have two options. One is to go to another candidate of their choice and add to their group, or to go to basically go home because your vote won't count if you don't have 15% for your candidate. And we determined during the first show from not just Michele but from friends of ours in Iowa. We got a call in from a gentleman named Jerry in Dubuque, and also from Phil, who I know is Phil in Iowa from 2004. I met Phil in 2004. Because he was helping out and working for a mutual friend of ours, Howard Dean in Iowa, in the Democratic Party caucus out there. Now, apparently, there's a lot of caucuses where Michele Bachmann got 7, 8, 9%, and those caucus goers didn't have an opportunity to have their voices heard for her in the final analysis, and had to either scatter and go to another candidate, or to just leave the caucus. And this is normal politicking. This is normal wholesale politicking, retail politicking in Iowa. And you have folks from the campaigns that get 15% in an individual caucus have an opportunity to go make their case to the folks who are there for candidates who get less than 15%. And of course, in many cases, that was Michele Bachmann. In many cases, Rick Perry received under the threshold of 15%. By dint of the fact that Newt Gingrich ended up with 14% of the vote overall, we know intuitively that there are a lot of a lot of folks, a lot of caucuses in different precincts where Newt Gingrich did not get 15%. And in that particular caucus, they had to either gravitate toward their second choice candidate or gravitate toward, or go home. Now, Michele, and I'll get Jerry and I'll get Phil back on the phone also to talk about this a little bit. But do you have any idea where caucus goers for Newt Gingrich went in precincts where they didn't have 15%, where they didn't meet that 15% threshold? Okay, I'm going to get Michele back on the phone. Yes, yeah. Did you hear my question over the air, Michele? Where did do you know of where caucus goers for Newt Gingrich tended to gravitate in precincts where they did not reach that 15% threshold? I guess I can say it on television. She says they went to hell. I know you're being a little bit facetious when you say that, but yeah, I understand that you and Newt had some difficulty with one another along the way. Newt, he's a pretty rough character. He is viewed by many folks in the evangelical and the Baptist community as being not worthy of their support simply because of Newt's 3 marriages. Rubs them the wrong way a little bit. The fact that Newt was having an affair with his third wife while his second wife was dying of cancer in the hospital. Some things like that. Newt has been for various health care proposals that rub candidates and rub caucus goers the wrong way. He's been on what they perceive as being the liberal side of some issues. Newt, as we know, received his group received $1.6 million. Michele, you want to add something into that? Okay, hold on. Yeah, yeah. She wants to make sure we point out that Newt's group got a contract with Fannie Mae while Fannie Mae was, let's just say, messing up quite a bit in their mortgage market antics. And Newt was advising them and getting paid to the tune of $1.6 million for advising them while all this was going on. And certainly, I guess, yeah, I understand your point, Michele. If Newt recognized, and he should have recognized, what was going on, then he should have made a point of that. He should have, rather than being part of that nonsense, should have been blowing the whistle. He should have been a whistleblower on what was going on at Fannie Mae rather than advising them. Now, whether he was advising them, and what direction he was advising them in, we'll have to make it. It's important to know, Michele, that whatever direction Newt was advising them in, we don't know. We don't know whether he was on the inside complaining about some of the stuff that was going on. But certainly, if he had blown the whistle on it, it's safe to say that he and his group that was being paid $1.6 million had blown the whistle on what was happening. They probably would have been fired from their consulting position. Yeah, I think that's safe to say. Okay, Basil, do you want to add something? Okay. Basil's at a loss for words, but what he is going to throw in is what's become his standard tagline. One of his standard taglines, when he blogs on the Washington Post, blogs on a lot of articles there. You can find him if you Google Basil BuddhaCat Washington Post. You can get quite a bit of his opinings, as well as on his Facebook page, Basil BuddhaCat, because Basil has a Facebook page, and Basil also blogs on a couple little what he calls right-wing conservative rags on the internet. One is Newsmax, which is a fairly well-known one, and one lesser-known one called Conservative Bite, and that's B-Y-T-E. So Basil has some things to say on there too. He goes in there not as a malicious troll or malicious lurker to discredit folks, but just to add his voice in and add some corrections to some of the things that are said, because I'll add that too, Basil. Basil notes that that he thinks of those particular sites, Conservative Byte and Newsmax, as being basically an echo chamber, in the sense that he says one person will make an outrageous remark about President Obama, and then the next 5 or 6 posts will be basically, yeah, me too, I agree, yep, what you said is right, yep. And Basil goes in, and Basil obviously has a different point of view, and he likes to get that point of view across, not in a malicious way, but he likes to correct inaccuracies. He likes to point out some claims which are incorrect in his opinion, some claims that facts prove to be incorrect. Basil claims to be, and I'm not sure whether he should, but he claims to be the originator of the line which has become very popular amongst pretty much every group now. The line, "You're entitled to your opinion." I hope I get them. Correct me if I don't get this right, Basil. I think I have it right. Everyone's entitled to their opinion, but people are not entitled to their own set of facts. Did I get that? Okay. Yep. Good. Okay. Thanks, Basil. Well, I want to get back a little bit about Basil himself, and you can find Basil on Facebook. Basil's got a Facebook page, and he's got about 350 friends, and as he found along the way when he friended my guest from Progressive Soup, my multiple-time guest, John Kasumi, who's head of the China Support Network, Basil friended John. And as soon as he did that, he began getting friend requests from a lot of folks that John knows, as Facebookers want to do. They'll introduce you to friends of a friend and see if you want to expand your friend group. And Basil got a lot of requests from and accepted quite a few of them, according to his intuitive sense about whether he should or shouldn't. He friended a lot of folks that whose names are in Chinese characters on Facebook. So Basil had some difficulty pronouncing their names. Now Basil doesn't speak English, so Basil and I, up until that point, in fact, communicate telepathically, and that's, as he and I both feel, not inconsistent at all with the fact that the both of us consider ourselves devout Christians. We believe Jesus Christ to be our Lord and Savior. The teachings of Jesus are very, very a good lesson for everyone to live by. And in fact, Basil notes. Okay, I'm going to make a point of that, Basil. I know you want me to say that. Basil notes that really, in fact, all 3 major religions, and in fact, also, Basil has a lot of friends who are atheists or agnostics. And Basil thinks it's important to note that the other 2 major religions, Islam and Judaism, are very similar to Christianity in the sense that they promote positive interaction, positive behavior, treating individuals as you would have them treat you, which is one of the precepts of the Old Testament in the Bible, and it's carried through to the New Testament by Jesus, who was a rabbi, who was Jewish, and of course in Hebrew, rabbi means teacher, and Jesus during his life was considered a teacher. I guess it's safe to say that when Jesus was put to death, and soon before then, his followers had his close followers, the 12 disciples, had come to view him as being God's voice on earth, the Son of God, the Son of Man, and had began thinking about the notion of branching off from Judaism and forming their own individuality, their own form of branch of Judaism, and they wanted to call it Christianity because they acknowledged Jesus to be Christ, to be the Son of God. Anyway, so Basil, that's enough about what your beliefs are. But Michele, again, back to the Iowa caucuses. Where did there were obviously quite a few. Oh, okay. Hold on. Yeah, we've got actually. Who is this? Oh, it's Phil calling in again. Phil, hold on a second, because I just posed a question to Michele Bachmann, and I want to give her an opportunity to discuss it a little bit. Now, Michele, did you keep track? First of all, did you, knowing that there would be caucuses in which your supporters would not meet that 15% threshold, did you give any indication to your followers, to your caucus goers, on what you would like them to do in those precincts where their votes would either have to go somewhere else or where their votes wouldn't count at all? Okay, hold on, Phil. Michele. Okay, I got to get Michele on the other line. Hold on. I'm going to put the phone down for a second, Phil. I'll be right back with you. Hold on. Okay, Michele, did you have a response to that? Did you advise your caucus goers to go somewhere else? No, don't fall down on the job, please. It's not a tough question. Hold on. I'm going to try to give Michele a little backing here, because it's important. Okay, hold on. Okay, there. I'm going to slide Basil over a tiny bit. Okay. Michele, did you give any advice to your caucus goers as far as what to do in precincts if they were in a precinct where you did not achieve that 15% threshold? Because in fact, if she ended up with 5% of the caucus votes, she got all of her votes in the precincts where she met that 15% threshold. But there obviously were a lot of other caucus goers who chose her as their candidate and were not allowed to actually be counted because they didn't reach that 15% threshold. So I think you'd have to say, Michele, would you consider that maybe if you got 5% of the votes in the final analysis, you probably had closer to 10 in the first go round, 10% of the caucus goers who went there to support you. Yeah, she thinks it's more like 12%, but 10, 12%, I think, is a safe number to say. Now, what happens? This is a question that I'll pose to you and to Basil, because it's a tough one, I think. The folks that ended up with now Mitt Romney and Rick Santorum ended up with around 25% in the final analysis, and Ron Paul ended up with 21%. So I think it's safe to say that they probably reached the 15% threshold probably in most of the caucuses that were attended. They probably got their 15% most everywhere. Now, if your caucus goers, Michele, were not allowed to stand with you because they didn't meet that 15% threshold, and likewise Rick Perry, who ended up with, I believe, 8%, or as has been noted, probably about $150 for each vote he got in terms of money spent campaigning. And Newt Gingrich, with 14%, obviously didn't meet the 15% threshold in a number of caucuses, and he probably spent, I think it's been noted, about $178 per vote that he actually ended up with in the final analysis. Who gained? Which of those three candidates gained votes from your folks who didn't meet the 15% in the caucus, or Rick Perry's votes that didn't meet the 15% threshold? Where do you think they went to? Okay, she thinks that in fact most of them probably went to Rick Santorum because he's the candidate that most closely approximates her beliefs and probably most approximates. Now, she's not going to speak for Rick Perry. This is her opinion, not speaking for the Rick Perry campaign, because Rick is still in the race. He's gone on to South Carolina to continue there. But she thinks most of her folks that decided to stay in probably went to Rick Santorum. So he probably gained some. Do you think any of your caucus goers went to Mitt Romney? She thinks that some of her caucus goers probably went to Mitt Romney because Romney's folks in each caucus had the opportunity after the first go round to speak to the groups that didn't reach the 15% threshold, and probably made some promises potentially, I guess, maybe possibly jobs or made some promises to try to sway them. And she thinks that Mitt Romney probably also got some, not a lot, but some of her caucus goers, simply by the fact that they had things promised to them by the folks from the Romney group. Do you think that Ron Paul got any of your folks? She says she doesn't think so because she saw the ads out in Iowa, and the ads in Iowa, of course, there were two sets of ads that were most striking. One set of ads went to the point of Newt Gingrich's fallibility, and those ads were put out not by Mitt Romney's campaign, but by a super PAC, which was controlled by close friends of Mitt Romney, and that's where those ads went to take care of Gingrich, after they had taken care of Rick Perry earlier on. Gingrich was the next perceived counterpart, the next perceived wall in the way of Perry's road to the nomination. But there was also, I heard a lot about them, Michelle. There were quite a few ads also that ran against Ron Paul and made note of some claims that Ron Paul has some of his supporters had put out some rather disturbing things about black people and about race riots and things of that nature. Those weren't proven. There was no fingerprints of Ron Paul on those postings, those bloggings, those writings. But I guess if you throw enough mud at somebody, some of it's obviously going to stick. So Michelle feels that very few people went from her campaign over to Ron Paul because Ron's a little different. Okay, Michelle, I'm going to check off now because I've got Phil on hold waiting. Hold on. Okay, Phil. Now I think we're just discussing with Michelle, as I think you heard, the notion that Ron Paul had a lot of negative ads run against him in Iowa, with a lot of very clear claims that Ron Paul has a background of racism. Now, did you see any of those ads? Yeah, Phil says he saw quite a few of those ads. Phil, what do you think of those? Did you buy into any of those ads? Phil said no. Phil said the ads are. Go ahead, Phil. Phil's saying that the ads were absolutely ridiculous. He thinks the ads were, for the most part, run by Mitt Romney's group. Because, okay, yep, I got you. See, Romney saw Ron Paul as being somebody in the way, that somebody whose supporters he may not get in the final analysis anyway, and perhaps doesn't care whether he gets the Ron Paul supporters anyway, because Ron Paul supporters, although a fairly substantial block of Americans, 21% in Iowa. We'll see what happens in New Hampshire. In New Hampshire, the polling, he's running around 18% at this point, which is second place behind Mitt Romney in the daily tracking poll in New Hampshire. So we'll see what happens there over the weekend and into next week. But Phil's telling me that he thinks that absolutely it was a lot said about nothing with Ron Paul. They don't like Ron Paul for a number of. Phil, go ahead, Phil. You want to tell our audience what your thoughts are as far as why Republicans don't like Ron Paul. Now, what do you mean by Republicans? Okay. The Republican. He says there's essentially two groups that are most disenchanted with Ron Paul. One is the what he calls establishment Republicans, and the other group is what he calls what Phil refers to as neoconservatives. And why is that, Phil? Okay. Yeah. Phil's telling me that Ron Paul's stance on the military is what bothers that part of the Republican Party the most. The part that's most closely tied with the military, with folks that make their money by building planes, jets, bombs, weaponry systems. People like GE, for example, who create Boeing and other companies that well, I guess you can say that, Phil. I guess you can say that on television. Okay, he says folks that suck at the teat of the federal government and get quite a bit of money for building weaponry systems that quite often don't work, that are outdated by the time that they're completed, but that make shareholders and CEOs and executives within General Electric and Boeing and some of these other companies, McDonnell Douglas. They make them an awful lot of money. They're the ones that are, as Phil says, they're the ones that are most out to get rid of Ron Paul at all costs. Well, we'll see what happens in New Hampshire. Anything else you want to add, Phil? Okay. Yeah. Phil says that he still wishes Howard Dean were president, even though he's quite fond of Barack Obama in a lot of respects. But there's some things, obviously, he says that well, Phil, is it safe to say, is it reasonable to say that number one, that Obama has some folks on the right that dislike him intensely and basically go against everything that if whatever the president says, they dislike because the president said it. Okay. Now, there's also some folks on the some groups within the Democratic Party that are angry with President Obama about things like extending, making it possible, not for himself, but for future presidents to overturn habeas corpus and disallow habeas corpus and arrest Americans without charging them with anything, for continuing the war in Iraq, which he did wind down according to schedule, but some other things and basically, I guess philosophically, a lot of Democrats are upset that Obama did not use the bully pulpit to promote progressive causes. Now, Phil, I'm not sure if I can buy that. And I'm going to ask Basil to weigh in on this, because Basil, I know, has posted a lot of blogs on the Washington Post, Newsmax, and Conservative Bite about this. And again, you can look up Basil, his Facebook page, Basil BuddhaCat. You can find him by Googling Basil BuddhaCat, Newsmax, Basil BuddhaCat, Conservative Bite. Basil Buddha. Okay, Basil, we're going to have to come back and address that on the next show because we're winding down now. But and Phil, thank you very much for calling in. Michelle, thanks very much for joining us. And this has been Basil BuddhaCat Presents. I'm David Stevenson, Basil's co-host. We have Basil BuddhaCat, the host of the show. And thank you to our guest, Michele Bachmann. Thanks very much. And enjoy your day. Bye. What? Okay. That's his other tagline. We wanted to end the show with that. Good night.
They say they'd rob your grandma blind on Wall Street, on Wall Street. Fritter her away her Medicare on Wall Street. And Pharma Oil and their pet fox don't care if she lives in a box, so long as they wear platinum jocks on Wall Street, on Wall Street. Meow.